hard in sorry, I just got a notification from Zoom. We sent out 5,000 postcards to voters in hard to reach units. So much like I live in an apartment, pretty difficult to door knock myself if you were trying to engage me as a voter. So we really wanted to make sure we are sending these postcards to voters that that we think would be receptive to our message and to our candidates, but who we don't always get to talk to through no fault of their own. And so, like Sam mentioned, it was not, the races at the top of the ticket did not all go the way that we wanted. And I think it's probably, normal and healthy to kind of look inward and, and go, all right, is there anything we can do better on that? But I think for a moment, I do want to focus on some of the races that we did win. Sam mentioned the port commissioner positions. Myself and a few other board members were also lucky enough to run into to Vivian Song Moritz, who is now on the Seattle City School Board. And so I just want to give a quick shout out to everyone who sent out these postcards, who sent out a batch of postcards and then came back to send out another batch of postcards. That you don't always know what thing is going to move the needle, right? And I think some of these postcards, at least speaking to Vivian, who's extremely excited to get to work on the school board, it seemed like they really moved the needle for voters that she was talking to, that she would get feedback back of like, oh yeah, you were endorsed by the 43rd, right? And she felt like that put her on pretty good footing with voters from the get-go. So I guess just wanted to say that, it's, I think we're all sort of feeling this mix of emotions, related to the election, but just really wanted to give a huge thank you to everyone who did put in their time and their energy. And I think even if we're looking at those tough losses, those postcards did move the needle, and I think that's something that we can be really proud of. So I hope everyone is proud of that. A little rambly, but I think that brings me to the end. I think that's all I got.
Yeah, thanks, Cody and Sam. Really appreciate that. And I just want to reiterate and extend our gratitude to everybody who supported, this. We started our PAC back in, I think, September. We voted on it in July and we had it up and running, by September. I really appreciate everybody who contributed to that, whether that was financially or helping us write postcards or help hand out postcards or came to our canvases. The work, we put a lot of time into our endorsements and we have a lot of people show up for that, but they don't mean much if we don't get out and talk to voters. And both times that we sent out the call for volunteers to contribute to the 43rd and to help us write out postcards, I was completely blown away by the response we got. So just really appreciate all of your efforts. Thanks so much. So before we get to the talk on Seattle Approves, we have one other guest speaker who I missed over, and it relates to the fact that we have another election coming up in one part of the district. So reminding you all that District 3, there is a recall election against Councilmember Shama Swant. Back in the spring, I forget exactly which month, we endorsed a no position on the recall. So I do really encourage folks to vote no on that yourself. If you live in District 3, let your friends know, do all of that work. And Emily is here from the Shama Solidarity Campaign and is going to talk about other ways you can get involved in that campaign. So Emily, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Scott. And yeah, thanks for making time on the agenda. And yeah, as you said, right, voters think voting is over. I've talked to dozens of people in the last 2 weeks at the doors who think they already voted for Shama or that the recall has already been defeated. Unfortunately, though, the right-wing racist recall got their off-year holiday special election. And so we are doing everything we can to build the biggest get out the vote operation that we can. I sent a link to Scott. I'm not sure if he can send it to the rest of the chat, but it's got some good tools, including like a calendar and ways to sign up for shifts if people are interested in helping. But we've got a big hill to climb in terms of COVID, meaning we can't canvass hard to access apartment buildings, an off-year election, and of course the right-wing framing of the recall itself. But there's also good news, right? We saw in District 3 that 24 to 35-year-olds were the highest turnout range in the most recent elections. We also saw that even though progressive candidates like NTK or Nikita Oliver lost citywide, they won in District 3. So that means that there's progressive support on the ground in District 3, but it's just a matter of turning them out and reminding them that this election exists. So we're out every single day for many, many shifts so we can really accommodate people's schedules. And there are just all kinds of ways to help. Of course, the 43rd LD was one of our earliest supporters, and we super appreciate that. And that's contrasted, of course, to the recall, which has been supported by over 500 Republicans and 130 Trump donors. And I think that it's easy to feel in Seattle like that's not a factor, but we did, of course, see the first Republican elected in over 30 years in Seattle with Ann Davison. So, we're here to really appeal for progressive support to help us defeat this recall, because I think now more than ever, we need the fighting record of Shema with the $15 an hour minimum wage, the Amazon tax, and now, of course, we desperately need rent control, where rents have gone up already 27% in the city. And Shema has introduced strong legislation, and we need to win that. So that's my appeal. And then, folks should definitely open the resource document. I think there's a lot in there. And if people have any questions, feel free to reach out to me via DM, or I can also put my phone number in this document that Scott shared.
Yeah, thanks so much, Emily. And yeah, let us know if you want to be connected to Emily or the Solidarity Campaign. We're happy to put folks in touch. And it's great seeing, cool thing with Google Docs is you can see when folks are viewing it. So it's great to see a bunch of folks jumping out of this doc. So, all right, with that, we will get back to our agenda. So up next, we have a presentation on approval voting from Logan Bowers. And then I think Troy as well. Is that correct, Logan?
Yeah, I have Troy with me. The way we did this in some of the other LD presentations was folks could post questions in the chat, and Troy helped me answer those. I don't know if you allow chat free for all, but if you do, he's happy to help you out with answering those while I go.
Sure, I will turn on chat for everybody right now, and then we'll turn that off again later. So if you do have questions as Logan is going, please put it in the chat, and Troy will help answer those.
Yep, so. And that way we can share links and things if the answer is somewhat academic.
Yep. Sounds great.
Okay, if you want to toss me screen sharing permissions.
Yeah, could you make Logan a co-host, Cass?
I'm yes, I'll make them a co-host. And
I appreciate folks being on their best behavior in the chat. Thanks.
Well, while she does that, thank you everyone for having me tonight. I'm excited to talk to you about voting reform that we can achieve here in Seattle this coming year in 2022. And I will give you the short version. There's a lot of depth and a lot that we can cover, but I will spare most of y'all that today. So if you do want to know more or get, there we go. If you do want to learn more, then definitely hit us up, and we can go as deep into the weeds as y'all would like to. Can you all see my screen here? Should see some slides.
We can, yes.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so I'm Logan Bowers, longtime member of the 43rd. I just moved out to the 37th, but I'm enjoying being here today. And then I have 43rd resident and co-chair Troy from Seattle Proves here with me today as well. Okay, so let's talk about real quick, what are we talking about here? So we are proposing a change to Seattle's primary election. Our top scientists came up with this highly precise mock-up of what a ballot might look like. And we're talking about a forward change here. So in a primary election, rather than being forced to pick only a single candidate, you can pick all the candidates you approve of. If you like 3 candidates, you can pick 3 candidates. If you like 10 candidates, because our races are so big, you can pick 10 candidates. Or if you really only like 1, you can pick 1. So I'll talk about kind of how that works out. There we go. Okay. So there's several really great properties from having this change in elections. The biggest one being no spoilers. I'll walk through an example of that, but that's where the vote gets split between 2 similar candidates and they both lose, and then we're all sad. Another really great strength here is that it really encourages policy campaigns. You're going to have candidates that are really thirsty for approval because they can always get a little bit more approval from folks by taking on appealing policies that appeal to you, because then you'll fill out that extra bubble for them. So it really focuses candidates on getting the largest coalitions they possibly can. The results will accurately show voter priorities. So if you have a single issue candidate in a race, folks might not vote for that candidate even though they like the issue because they feel like they're throwing their vote away. But your voting results then show real clear who likes what issues, because voters can always fill in that bubble for that single issue voter. The thing we really love about this, though, more than anything else, is it's a very equitable reform for time broke voters. So what does that mean? It means that the voting approval voting reform is very, very simple. It's very easy to understand. Folks that don't have a lot of time to understand new voting rules, or maybe English isn't their second language, or maybe they have a cognitive disability, they won't have trouble using approval voting because it's just like what they already have, except even more permissive in terms of what you can fill out, and the ballot looks basically the same. So we really like the fact that this can work for basically everyone. Excuse me. I'll walk real quick through a spoiler example. Suppose we're picking an emperor to lead the Galactic Senate. So we have 3 candidates: Darth Vader, Leia Organa, General Leia Organa, and Luke Skywalker, and we have to vote. So maybe Leia is our candidate, so we fill in the bubble for her in a traditional election, and then we tally the vote. And the unfortunate thing is, even though we'd really love someone from the Rebel Alliance to be a leader of the Galactic Senate, the vote is split between Luke and Leia, and so Darth Vader wins with 40% of the vote. So that's really unfortunate that the dark side rules. The way this would work in an approval voting is, suppose you're a voter who really loves Rebel Alliance candidates, so you could pick both Leia and Luke. And then when we go to tally the vote, Luke still gets, Vader still gets his 45%. Luke gets 50% because some of the Leia voters cross over, and Leia might be pulling even more voters out of the Vader camp. And so she can get that approval as high as 65. And so Leia wins, and we have somebody from the Rebel Alliance leading the Galactic Senate. So in Seattle, we have this problem in spades. This is from the 2019 primary. In D6, we had 13 candidates. I should update the slide because we have 15 candidates in the mayoral election. Our elections are huge. Spoiler votes are rampant. It's unfortunate trying to pick someone out of that. It's just much more rational to pick, I don't know, 4 candidates, whoever you like. When the fields are that big, there's going to be more than one. So timeline, next steps for us. We want to hear from you. This is the really quick, short condensed version. If you're interested, if you like it, if you don't like it, we want to hear any and all feedback. So reach out to us. We want to know if you see this on a initiative in 2022 and you're interested in signing. So this goes to the voters in November of 2022. If you're ready to take that plunge, we want to hear from you too, so that we can set that up, so that when we do hopefully move forward with some voting reform in this city, we can hit the ground running. We're going to spend the rest of 2021 building awareness, reaching out to anyone and everyone who wants to be a stakeholder in this process, and and submit feedback. So tell us who we should reach out to. Tell us who you think is really going to have a great perspective on this, so that we can get everyone involved as early as possible. I'll plug real quick. We do have a mailing list on Seattle Approves. We don't have a whole lot of traffic on it. So if you do want to just get periodic updates, sign up for that. We organize in Discord. There's a link on Seattle Approves. Come join us in the Discord. We always love to hear from new folks who are excited about voting reform and making our elections more equitable. And then, of course, tell your friends if you think this is something interesting. So that's the real quick pitch from me. And yeah, I can answer some questions with the time that we have remaining.
Yeah, we've got about 10 to 15 minutes for questions, and I see a bunch of good ones in the chat already. I'm going to start off really quickly with one. So is your proposal for approval voting, would we get rid of primaries or would we still have a primary in Seattle elections?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we would continue to have a primary in Seattle, and so this would only affect the primary election. The top two winners of that with the highest approval would then move on to the general, just as they do today. And that's a factor of state law. So we can't change that without a state legislative change. I think there's, I think the discussion of whether or not to have a primary, you can kind of have independently of which voting method you choose. You could use it in the primary, or you could go straight to a general. And I think that conversation is worth having. We're excited, honestly, that we can have just the voting method conversation, and then we can revisit the primary at a future date. And I think that's definitely worth doing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just want to make sure folks had clarity on that. And then collating from the chat, there are a lot of questions about why not ranked choice voting. So could you maybe speak about the differences there and why you think approval voting is the right way to go?
Yeah, so we've seen approval voting adopted in Fargo and St. Louis. I think St. Louis especially picked it specifically because they had equity issues in how their elections typically wound up being a minority city. So I think what we're seeing here is approval voting is much more accessible for voters, just because the change is smaller, the ballot is simpler, especially when it's a mail-in ballot. You don't have a big matrix grid of dots and the long instructions to go with it. So those are two things that really important to us to keep this simple so that no one is disenfranchised by a voting reform. It also it works really well, like really well. And the academic literature shows that approval voting is one of the best in terms of accurately matching winning candidates with the intent of the voters. And so it's deceptive because it's so simple, but it actually is much better at aligning which candidate wins with what the voters really intended with their vote.
Yeah, thanks for that. So at this point, there have been a lot of good questions in the chat, but I am worried that I can't condense them all into my own. So if folks could raise their hand, we will go through there. So Camille, you are up first.
Yeah, so one of the questions that's been echoed by several people is this seems like it might disproportionately disadvantage more progressive grassroots candidates, BIPOC women, people who don't have a lot of funding. I don't know, I'm thinking of several of the races that happened just this past year in Seattle that this could have very much disproportionately, I mean, yeah, my question is how does this not affect those types of candidates?
Yeah, I think Seattle's pretty unique since we all have the democracy vouchers here. I hope y'all used them last cycle. And that program is phenomenal because it allows outside candidates that don't have traditional funding or large corporate backing to enter races and raise real money and be able to run a competitive race. And a lot of people do that, and that's phenomenal for the city. And that's why we have these huge races. But it doesn't really matter if they can, even though, BIPOC folks, women of color, outsider candidates can raise all this money, they can't break into actually winning these primaries because when it comes down to it, folks are going to feel like if they're voting for one of these outside candidates, they're throwing their vote away. So approval voting gives voters the ability to take a risk on an outside, on a marginalized or outside candidate without feeling like they're throwing their vote away. And I think that actually then produces a real opportunity for them to win. And I think what we've seen in elections is it's very rare, even in the democracy voucher era. It's common for an outside candidate to raise a lot of money. It's uncommon for them to win a primary. So I hope this is the goal of this, is to make that better.
Will.
Yes. So one of the things that I would think about is that this might, in fact, make it more difficult for women to run, in that we could have, I mean, the cold hard reality in the United States is that in many cities, people tend to vote for white males. Look at the people who show up right now on your screen. Look at people who show up at public meetings. And in many cases, because of the feedback they get, they don't show up. So they're going to have less recognition and will probably get fewer votes under this system. But that's my personal opinion. Thank you.
Hey, I appreciate the concern. I think that's definitely something we'll need to track. The good news on that front is the system was adopted in St. Louis in 2020 and used in their first mayoral primary in 2021. And one of the woman who is now mayor of St. Louis lost a woman of color, lost narrowly in the previous mayoral primary. And but then when approval voting came through, it turned out that she had lost because the vote was split among several BIPOC candidates. And this time around, she won. And now she's mayor. And then she won the general election. Now she's mayor of St. Louis. So so at least there, with their adoption last year, they had a success story exactly along those lines.
Yeah, Anne Marie, I'm trying to unmute you. Great, and we'll go for about 5 more minutes, folks.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I'm going to repeat what the previous 2 speakers just said. I would be concerned that the multi-voting, whatever phrase you want to call it, is really a popularity contest. So I would be concerned that people see a bunch of yard signs and they click on 2 or 3 or all 17 candidates because they recognize those names, not because they're the people that they're most enthusiastic about as a candidate. So that would be my first comment. My second comment was, I'm delighted to hear that there was a success with this type of voting. What you think is a success, I don't know that we can attribute the mayor being voted into her seat because of this type of voting. But I'd be happy to look at the data and certainly learn what the League of Women Voters learned and how they decided to support this type of change.
Yep. And I would encourage you to send me an email. I'm happy to send you more details on that. And and just for reference, the League of Women Voters in St. Louis did endorse their Proposition D in 2020 for approval voting reform. So they had a pretty broad coalition going for them in St. Louis.
Great, Ron.
Thanks, Logan, for presenting. It's good to see you. My question for you is, I guess I don't think that it's avoidable in a vote to that popularity contests are avoidable in a democratic vote of any sort. So I think in the end, my question is really about sort of optimization as it aligns with voter preferences, right? So that we're just, and not just highly activated voters, but voters in general, right? Population preferences. And so my guess is there's a fair amount of academic literature on this, obviously, because there's not a ton of examples of it being in place. They're going to be somewhat limited in their empiricism, but it's nice. It's the kind of stuff mathematicians are really good at. It's not always great reading, but I know that work has been done on ranked choice and other kinds of voting systems and sort of pulling off the paradoxes. I'm just curious if you can point us to any really kind of good resources on kind of, whatever it is, whether it's ranking and rating the different types against each other or anything, because I don't think I've ever seen this analyzed closely.
Wow, I just want to say that Ron is not a plant here, but like you literally set me up perfect. There's a fantastic piece of literature on this. The term to Google is voter satisfaction efficiency. And there's a good write-up on voter satisfaction efficiency. And that is basically they take voting systems, because there's actually like dozens of them. There's tons of them. Voting nerds think up a lot of creative ways to run elections. And then they do some realistic simulations for what would the outcome be as you on a scale of like 1 to 100, where 0 is pick candidate at random, and 100 is read the minds of voters and pick the candidate that matches the most voters. And so they kind of score all of them. And so like plurality voting, which is what we have today, scores like 75-ish. Approval voting's in the 85 to 90 range. Ranked choice is somewhere in between. There's a few super nerdy versions like what's called star voting, and you can go read about that, that are even better. They're also much more complex. So getting back to that equity and time brokenness, we're excited about approval for hitting that sweet spot of being really, really effective, much better than what we have today, and very accessible for voters. But yeah, voter satisfaction efficiency is get you straight to some good comparisons and reading on that. And they have both a short version and a long version. So
cool. Thank you. I just Googled it. I have it open in a tab. Thanks.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. So we're going to have Heidi and Annabelle ask questions, and then that will be it. So Heidi, please take it away.
Yeah, hi, Logan. I just want to thank you very much for presenting this. I love this idea. You know, if the Republican Party had this in place, Trump never would have won the nomination because it was split amongst all the other sane people. And so my question is I like the idea that this is simpler, but I am concerned that they're just not going to check off. It's simpler than rank voting, but I am concerned that they're just going to check off everybody. And then you really don't get any really valid information out of that. So 2 questions. One, are there any thoughts on limiting the amount of people you can vote for? And if this passes, what are your plans to expand it beyond Seattle? Thank you.
Great question. And thank you. Yeah, so in St. Louis, I believe the results were 1.5 votes on average per voter. So folks definitely use the system. They didn't go super crazy. There is, I mean, I think, as I'm sure for many of us who have canvassed doors, we do occasionally meet somebody who's like, I like everyone but this one person, or I like everyone but this two people. This gives them an ability to express that, which maybe isn't the way I would vote, but it's the way they would vote. And so so I'm happy that they have the ability to express that opinion. But out of both Fargo and St. Louis, it's looking like folks use the system. They use it a reasonable amount and not a crazy amount. And I think that's about perfect. The best we could hope for. I think in Seattle, we probably see like 2 to 3 votes per person, candidates per person, just because our races are so huge.
And then the other part of the question, Logan, was
go and stay.
If this passes, and so this needs to pass at the city level, and then what would be the path moving forwards to expand? Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, thank you. I think the big things there, so any other city with its own charter could adopt it after that. And obviously, anyone in King County elections is going to then have experience with an approval voting system. So we would be excited for other large cities. We would probably have to rely on our esteemed state reps who I see in our chat today to make a state law change so that code cities, that's the smaller towns who have their rules prescribed by state law, we would probably have to ask them for a change to bring this to other areas in Seattle. But maybe I can maybe we can send our representatives an email on that topic, and they can help us out at a future date.
Yes, you'll have a chance to ask them about that very briefly here, everybody. So
apologies in advance for signing you up.
Yeah, Annabelle, last one, and yeah, if we could, we'll wrap it up then.
Yeah, I'm wondering what there's been a lot of claims like that this is more accessible or would be more accessible. And I'm not seeing a lot of data or reference to data. Is there any data or studies on actual elections run under this system? I'm not talking about simulations, because simulations are only as good as the simulator's ability to mimic human behavior, which is not usually good. So
Yeah, Annabelle, I think that's a great question. And obviously it's always better to have a real world example. And we are fortunate enough to have that. St. Louis adopted approval voting as part of a voting reform package in November of 2020.
I know we have the anecdote because you shared that. I'm asking if there's been any actual analysis of the vote and
Yeah, so
from a scientific standpoint, and if
yeah,
that's
so I mean,
published somewhere.
yeah, so there's a couple things you can look at coming out of those elections. The biggest one you can look at is what happened with turnout, or more specifically, did anyone return a ballot without any ovals filled in? Did they undervote? Did they overvote? Is there an error on their ballot? And what we see with approval voting in St. Louis, just looking at their elections department's results, is you get very consistent, just as you would prior to reform. You get the same kind of rates of return of ballots, the same levels of successfully filled out ballots. And then we see the metric of how many candidates did voters select on average. And we see the same thing in Fargo as well. So Fargo adopted it in 2018, and they've already used it for some of their city elections, which is turnout stays normal. The number of discarded ballots doesn't go up. Voters pick more than one candidate on average, and so all of those metrics coming out of both of those cities who adopted it prior. If you just go to their elections websites and look at the results,
has there been analysis to determine whether or not the multiple voting made a difference in those races?
So you can, neither election department, to my knowledge, publishes the data on a granular enough level for you to be able to see exactly how the pairwise votes lined up. So you can infer it by looking at how close the votes are, but you can't know it decisively just because the ballots
were the winners leading in the polls.
Yeah, the winners were all popular, right? Which is the goal of the election.
Right, but I mean, if the winner was polling at 60% and they won, well, your voting system probably didn't have anything to do with that victory. Is my point.
Yeah, all of the races
the kind
were
of analysis
close.
that I'm asking for. Like, are we?
Yeah.
Is anybody looking at this with an interested but skeptical eye? Like, I don't want. Like, I understand. Like, we're all enthusiastic about having a good voting system, but we also want to make sure that we're not just getting carried away by this being a cool new thing, and looking for the data we want, as opposed to looking critically to make sure that we're not, we're not making assumptions about what is affecting those elections.
Yeah, absolutely.
The last thing I'll add here, is if you could share links, that'd be wonderful. But our endorsements are very close to this mechanism. Very close, not quite, because we can actually endorse multiple people, but the mechanism is very similar. And I'm wondering if other LDs are similar, and if that is a potential source of data for understanding how people might actually vote under this kind of a system.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is not something I've thought about looking at. So that's interesting. I'm gonna have to go back and take a look, but definitely the LDs I've visited, they all use similar processes like that. So I will say in Fargo and in St. Louis, the races were competitive. It wasn't like it was already preordained. Sure. St. Louis especially had some issues with having non-representative candidates, and this election definitely turned more representative. So that's a good sign, even if you can't inspect the ballots to the granularity that you would want to decisively know that, decisively know how that played out. But I think everything's looking good. I'll leave it at that. Hey, thank you all so much for your time. Check out so many great links popped up in the chat from a lot of different folks. So go back and take a look at that. Come join us on Seattle Approves. Send us our feedback, good, bad. Join us on Discord. We always love to hear from everyone. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Logan and Troy, for joining us. And thanks everybody for really good questions. So pretty clear that folks want to get this right, and really appreciate your engagement on this. So moving on, we are going to have our 2022 legislative session preview. So we do have our three 43rd legislators here with us. Before we get to them, our policy committee chair, Camille Gix, is going to go over the work that she has been doing with the policy committee and some of our top priorities. I'm sure our legislators will hit on many of them. So Camille, yeah, if you could give us a very brief overview, that would be great.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Scott. So first of all, thank you to everyone who filled out our voter-fied call out with your top priorities for the legislative session. We used those to frame our agenda for this year. And we had a really productive conversation last Tuesday in the policy committee to put together what we thought would be the top priorities of the 43rd District Dems. So just a really brief overview of what those priorities are based on the votes that we received. Our number one issue as a district of people who filled out the survey is progressive taxation. We support any efforts towards passing a state income tax. We specifically this year are hoping to pass the wealth tax and reform to the estate tax and an inheritance tax. Our number two priority is dense and deeply affordable housing for all. So we want in the budget to put a minimum of 400 million towards low AMI housing, drastic changes to our city and state zoning laws to allow for more urban density, a budget proviso for House Bill 1220, which we supported last year, and the passage of the Housing Justice Act. In terms of immediate climate response, we want to see the return of House Bill 1099 and see that passed, as well as Senate Bill 5042. We want the transportation package to focus on a fix-it-first methodology for highways and then heavily focus on public transportation and improving multimodal transportation, such as a high-speed rail, and follow-up bills to the fossil fuels, House Bill 1084. Additionally, we are interested in looking at system-wide racial and social justice, at education and police accountability bills, such as providing increased and equitable education funding according to the McCleary decision and the creation of community oversight boards. And our final point on our agenda is voting rights with the state implementation of ranked choice voting. So looking forward to hearing what our delegation is going to be working on.
Yeah, thanks so much, Camille.
You're muted, Scott.
Thank you, Camille. So we will start this off with our reps kind of giving an overview of what their priorities are. I know they're in discussions with their caucuses about caucus-wide priorities. And so, yeah, if we could get all of our reps unmuted and spotlit. I'm working on doing that. Cass, if you could help, that'd be great. And then I know Nicole's here as well. All right, so thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate you being here. So I will just say, Senator Peterson, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Good evening. I'm a little tired because we were up past midnight last night working on the colossal cluster of redistricting, which now is going to be decided by the Supreme Court. I guess it's, from my perspective, Nicole and Frank may have a different point of view, but from my perspective, that's better than the plan that the Republicans were going to require us to agree to. So I'm willing to take my chances with the Supreme Court. I think one thing that we're likely to get out of them is a Voting Rights Act compliant district in the Yakima Valley. And the Republicans essentially said over our dead bodies, will we agree to district there that performs for Democrats. So we'll be making comments to the court, and I think everybody in the public will have the opportunity to submit comments to the court as that moves through the process. I hope that folks in the 43rd will take advantage of that opportunity. In terms of work for the legislature, we will continue to be working on police accountability issues this year and generally on criminal justice reform. One bill that I am continuing to work on affects pretrial release and detention, the bail issue. Essentially, we know that a far disproportionate number of Black and brown people are arrested and wind up having their lives dramatically disrupted as they wait for trial. That's been particularly true during the pandemic. And so creating a system that holds far fewer people and doesn't require them to submit cash bail during that period is one that we've essentially been in a gigantic experiment since the pandemic. Our jail populations have gone down substantially, and there actually isn't much evidence that those increased releases have resulted in any additional crime. So we'll be talking about that. We're also working hard with our counterparts in the House and with the governor's office on some minor fixes to a couple of the police reform bills from last year. In particular, clarifying that police are allowed to use reasonable force to help put people into involuntary treatment, and that they're allowed to use beanbag rounds, for example, less lethal kinds of rounds. I suspect that we'll get those bills without too much trouble to the governor's desk. In addition to that, I've been working with the Frayne and the Seattle Subway folks on a bill that will permit the sub-zones essentially within the Sound Transit area to develop proposals for enhanced service and then to tax themselves so that they can increase the service levels or speed up project delivery. I think we're in a period where it's going to be a long time before the voters in the entire regional transit area are ready to increase taxes on themselves to build out more of the system. There's clearly a significant desire within the city of Seattle to build out more, faster, better. And I think in particular, as we're about to embark on one of the most expensive parts of that, which is the second tunnel through downtown, we have a real opportunity to either to build that in a sort of short-sighted way that will foreclose the possibility of increased connection lines over time, or to invest a little bit more money to make it a lot easier to have a more robust system that crisscrosses the city later. So I've been also talking to members of the Sound Transit Board and feel cautiously optimistic about the prospects for that. So the last thing that I'll just say so that we have more time for conversation, and I'm eager to hear from Frank and Nicole, is that after the experience of last night, we are working really hard on some legislation that will promote transparency in the redistricting process. First of all, we need to have clarity about what exactly a redistricting plan is. It just can't be the case that people are voting on a vague set of numbers that they've been discussing and not on maps that everybody can be certain of. And then maybe even more importantly, similar to what we do with the budget in the legislature, those maps ought to have to sit in front of the commission, available to the public for review and comment for some period. And I don't know whether the right period is 48 hours or 72 hours, but there needs to be a period where the public has access to the maps before they get voted on. So, I'm sure we'll have suggestions for other reforms, but I'm hopeful that those are a couple that we could get broad bipartisan support for. With that, I'll turn it over to Frank and Nicole. Happy always to be here with them because they're absolutely fantastic colleagues in the legislature. Great pleasure to work. Thank you.
Go ahead, Miguel.
Thanks, Frank, and thanks for those kind words, Jamie. And it's good actually to hear about a couple of things you're working on that I didn't realize. And just so folks know, so I'm Nicole Macri, your state representative, and it's great to be here with Frank and Jamie. This is not the first time we've seen each other today, because we actually work relatively closely as a delegation. Jamie hit on a number of top priorities. I'll say I have been closely working with the House team on some of the clarifications around the use of force legislation. In my work outside the legislature, I work considerably on behavioral health crisis response, and some of the clarifications that we are seeking there are to clarify peace officers' responsibility in community caretaking roles, including in behavioral health crisis response, along with mental health professionals. So I agree that we're hopeful that will be something that will get to the governor's office relatively easily. And other things, Camille, thank you for that overview of priorities. I will say that on the housing and homelessness front, your priority agenda from the 43rd District Democrats aligns pretty closely with what a number of us have been working on. Actually, Frank and I have been working very closely on a couple of the things that you have mentioned, particularly this $400 million investment in deeply affordable housing, particularly for people who are currently unhoused. I, a couple of years ago, introduced a bill to bring more diverse housing and reform some zoning on a statewide level. I'll say that's a pretty heavy lift of a bill, but we continue to work on it. And I've been working pretty closely with both Representative Bateman, who represents the district down in Olympia, along with Senator Mona Das from South King County on zoning policy. I am a vice chair on appropriations, and we have heard clearly from local governments about implementation issues related to House Bill 1220. That's the Growth Management Act policy related to affordable housing. And that, along with House Bill 1099, which is the climate resiliency related to the Growth Management Act, which we did pass out of the House last year, but it did not make it through the Senate. We both of those come with costs to local government. We're hoping to get 1099 done this year. A lot of folks have been working on that policy. Housing Justice Act, this is something that advocates have been working on for years. We did pass an ordinance in Seattle. This is related to people, ensuring that people with criminal histories can have equitable access to housing. That again is a heavy lift bill for a short session, but I'm hoping that it will make some progress, if not get over the finish line this year. The coalition of advocates who've been working on it have been doing a lot of work this interim on that policy. I've been working as well on with a number of legislators on to address rent gouging. So to help stabilize rents, I have heard from a number of constituents in the 43rd about large rent increases. This is a statewide challenge. It's a nationwide challenge if you've been reading the national news about what's happening with housing costs generally, and particularly with rents. So we've been working on some policy strategies that would be similar to what we have, what has already been enacted in Oregon and California, to put a cap on how high rents can go. There's broad agreement among legislators that rent increases of 25%, 50%, and 100%, which is what I'm hearing out of Spokane. I'm routinely hearing about rent increases of 25% in Seattle, but rents are doubling in Spokane right now. there's broad agreement that that just is unacceptable and that there should be some guardrails put on that. And on the climate action, the clean buildings policy, which you referenced last year's House Bill 1084, that remains a top priority. And we hope to see progress on that policy this year. And you also mentioned transportation package. There has been a lot of negotiation going on around the transportation package, and we will see where that heads. The infrastructure package at the federal level that was signed yesterday, we are hopeful will help relieve some of the pressure on that work there. And thank you for your comments of a fix it first approach and deep investments in multimodal options, and including public transportation. I mean, I think that definitely aligns with my priorities, and I think the entire delegation. And we will see where those negotiations go. But the strong backing of the constituents of the 43rd have been very helpful to me in my engagement with our Transportation Committee chair in the House. And I recently met with the 43rd District Dems Environmental Caucus, and we talked a bit more in detail about some of the transportation priorities. But the idea that we will do some of the same old and sort of spread the money around, including into highway expansion, is something that I just find not to be tenable any longer, given the accelerated rate of climate change. So we'll be working on that. And I'll say the other big issue I continue to work on is on behavioral health, beyond just the crisis response and collaboration, interaction with law enforcement, and trying to divert people from interactions with law enforcement. We have been on a long time path to both bolster our behavioral health system and make some needed reforms to make sure that people have access at the community level to the behavioral health care that they need. And we are now, I think, experiencing a perfect storm. That pandemic related impacts mean that more and more people are experiencing behavioral health challenges. And at the same time, we are seeing more and more people leave the profession because of the stress caused by the sort of under-resourced nature of the work. And so I'll be making a big push for budget investments in behavioral health, as well as some reforms to how the system is structured to ensure that we have more equitable access for, particularly for extremely low income people living with behavioral health conditions. So I'll leave it at that and pass it on to Frank.
Well, thanks very much there, Nicole and Jamie. Appreciate it very much. It's been great working with both of you on a whole range of issues, including the 43rd District legislative agenda. Looking at what we've seen so far and unveiled here, I'm sure we're supportive of the whole overall effort. Last year, I was, for example, a sponsor of the wealth tax. At some point, that's going to see the light of day and hopefully get passed to address some of the public needs that we have in our state. Also, I'm very pleased that you put a real emphasis on housing for all. That's something I've dedicated my life to, and along with Nicole and others. And I appreciate Camille being involved in one of our efforts in regards to that, which I'll get to in a sec. I also totally support the idea of fix it first in the transportation budget. That is extremely important, investing more in transit and things like that. So the three of us actually met with some folks from the State Department of Transportation today, try to figure out how much money will be coming from the federal government. But our priorities is to, make sure we follow those philosophies of fix it first. In addition, though, I want to highlight a few things. On housing, Nicole and I are working together to get $400 million of the unallocated federal ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan, for supportive housing for individuals and people who are suffering out there. A large percentage of the people who are homeless have behavioral health challenges, mental illness, substance use disorder. We need to really amp up our efforts. Now, we've done a lot over the last few years to really increase the funding for housing for people who are facing those challenges, but we need to up it by at least the 400 million in the federal unallocated funds there for that. And I think there's a good chance we'll do that. And at the same time, as I mentioned that Camille was at one of my stakeholder meetings, we are proposing an idea called a prescription for a home. Since such a large percentage of the people who are facing homelessness are there by virtue of mental illness or substance use disorder, it ought to be seen in the context of healthcare and the context of behavioral health, particularly as Nicole mentioned. And so we are proposing actually a right to a home, which would be substantially a great step forward in terms of social policy, and to tie it to healthcare in particular, because if you're homeless and you've got mental illness and all that, and you might get some prescription drugs for, taking every day and all that kind of stuff. But if they discharge you from the clinic or the Harborview and you go on the street, what happens then? Well, your health does not improve. It gets worse. You suffer and in many cases die. We have got to stop that. So consequently, the concept of prescription for a home has got some real support on this thing, but we have to not only set it up as part of the healthcare system, but to ensure that we have the housing production in terms of having enough homes for people to move to. This is incredibly important. In addition, as part of our housing agenda, I started a program called Home and Hope about 4 years ago, and it's going great guns. We've identified and are acquiring 20 major sites in King County, much of which is in Seattle, for affordable housing and other community facilities like childcare facilities and other community health clinics and that kind of thing. And I'm really excited about it. In fact, I don't know if you've been up to the Roosevelt Light Rail Station, but it's spectacular, okay? We passed a state law, I'm very proud of, requiring Sound Transit to not just build transit stations, which in some cases displace low-income people around the light rail stations, but to actually mandate that the air rights above stations and any surplus property that the transit agency has will be turned over to nonprofit or local government housing agencies for affordable housing. So it's for social housing. And as a result, if you get a chance to go at the Roosevelt Light Rail Station, right above it is 270 units of affordable housing, plus a early learning center to be built. It's as part of the development to be run by El Centro de Raza. Then also for you, those of you in Capitol Hill or First Hill, we acquired Sound Transit surplus property at Boylston and Madison, and it's great. Go up there. It's being constructed. It's going to go up 17 stories. For those who are concerned about higher density, well, we're doing it. Madison and Boylston is just really exciting because it's going up 17 stories. There will be 370 units, all affordable, all social housing, and 120 of those units will be for homeless seniors. So we're helping a variety of needs there. Well, I can keep going on further, but I got to mention a couple other things. I totally support the work that we're doing that Nicole is involved in quite a bit too, in terms of behavioral health, the services. But if you provide the services, you have to have the workforce. So we want to make a lot more investments in workforce and to build on what we did with the Workforce Education Investment Act passed in 2019, where we have the best financial aid for students in the nation by far. We are providing free college and university tuition for all low-income students, whether it's the community college or the University of Washington. We want to expand that to raise the eligibility to about 100% of average median income. That'll be even greater for the people around the state in terms of affordability. And we want to target some of that money for investment in behavioral health workforce, whether it's a master's in social work that has a psychiatric emphasis or things like that. There's a lot of investments we need to make. I could keep going. I do want to mention that a big part of this next year will be defending much of what we've already done. Let me give you an example. On the capital gains tax that finally we're able to get through the Senate there. Now, Jamie has been supporting it for years, but we got it through and we dedicated it to the Fair Start for Kids Act. It provides $500 million a year for childcare and early learning, doubling the state investments in that regard. Well, guess what? It's being sued by the rich bastards over there, and we need to fight back against that. and make sure that we defend it, because it's an incredibly important social progress, both in terms of doing the right thing for our kids and our families and jobs, et cetera, but also having a fair tax system. In addition, we're being sued right now by, ever hear of the BIAW? Okay, those bastards are suing Nicole and me. I mean, not personally, but Nicole and I worked hard to create the Home Security Fund, which is funded by a document recording fee. And so they're suing, saying, "Oh, it's it's a tax, not a fee," and blah blah blah. What goes into the money, which is $150 million a year, goes into Home Security Fund that provides services to those who are homeless. The last part of that I want to mention is the Long-Term Cares Act. We passed the first in the nation expansion of Social Security for long-term care. And Nicole and I are both on the commission to help implement that. But it is being not only sued, but they're starting an initiative to repeal it, Initiative 1436. Please pay attention. This is funded by House Republican rich people who fund their campaigns. They're doing it to get rid of a social insurance program that is very progressive, but also to defeat Democrats in the polls in swing districts next year. It's extremely important. So I would encourage you to have a forum on Initiative 1436 and pay attention to it, because that's the driving force for the elections next year, or excuse me, one of the major driving forces. And so we have to defend it and make sure we implement it, because it's incredibly important for the future of everybody in the state, but particularly in terms of progressive social policy. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much to all of you. You highlighted a bunch of great issues, which I know folks were interested in hearing about. So yeah, want to give folks the opportunity to ask questions or bring up stuff that you're following that wasn't mentioned. So please raise your hand if you're interested in asking a question. All right, Kelsey.
Hey, all, thank all of you for being here. Of course, always love when you guys give us updates and joining on meetings, which you do frequently, so I appreciate. But I was wondering, when we're talking about the transportation package, I know the transportation chair is up for appointment basically right now, so I was curious about inklings around that and how that would affect the transportation package, like what insight you might have there.
Well, one of the funny dynamics about the legislature is that there are 147 of us, and we're all human beings with our own foibles. Senator Hobbs, who has been the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee since we retook control of the Senate, certainly had his share of, or has his share of foibles, both in terms of transportation policy and in terms of environmental policy. The two leading contenders for the appointment are Senator Rebecca Saldana, our neighbor to the south in the 37th district, and Senator Marco Elias, the 21st, who was the vice chair of transportation in the House for many years. I think it's fair to say, and I don't think Senator Hobbs would be offended by this, that both of them are substantially more progressive than Senator Hobbs is, more attuned to environmental issues and caring more about that, and I think are likely to help, regardless of which of them it is, are likely to help kind of bring the Senate Democrats closer to the House Democrats in terms of putting together a package. So I view that as likely positive in terms of our ability to put together a transportation revenue package that folks in the 43rd would like, and that Nicole, Frank, and I would be able to support.
Yeah, thanks. Great question, Kelsey. Logan, you're up next.
Yeah, thanks. So I wanted to ask real quick about housing. I saw an alarming chart today that indicated that this kind of current wave of inflation and labor shortages have been phenomenally wonderful for folks at the lower end of the wage spectrum. They're better off than they were a few years ago. There's a group in the middle class that are actually doing worse. Their wages are not going up while inflation is eroding their buying power, especially on housing. And I know Representative Chop has been a champion for a long time, kind of covering that lower end, folks with lower wages who need supportive housing. And the cities haven't really been pulling their load. zoning enough housing capacity for that middle class that's maybe too wealthy to own a home, but not wealthy enough to drop $1 million, which is now the case what you need in Seattle. I was just wondering if y'all are gonna have anything going this year to kind of nudge cities in the right direction to build enough housing for that middle class that's currently getting eroded.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Logan. I worked on this bill in 2020, which was House Bill 2779, and we plan to bring back some version of that. I think Representative Bateman may prime sponsor that bill this year, or some version around more diversified housing, so this sort of missing middle density type housing across the state. One of the challenges is that the cities are pretty resistant to being nudged along. We definitely experienced that last year with House Bill 1220 around affordable housing and the Growth Management Act. So in a short session, this bill is a really heavy lift, but we have been doing a lot of education with members about just how extreme the housing crisis is, and it goes far beyond the Puget Sound now. And so there are more legislators who are interested, but cities are organizing, particularly smaller cities, to oppose any land use policy coming out of the legislature. So, we'll continue the fight, and advocacy it will be very helpful, and from around the state, not necessarily to us here in the 43rd, but to legislators, particularly in suburban districts.
If I could add there, it's very important to not only care about folks who are low income, and Nicole and I have a long history of working on that. Thank you very much for your notice of that. But we also need to have workforce housing, and the city and the Housing Authority in Seattle, as well as other public development authorities, need to be financed in order to buy up or build social housing that is directly affordable for basically middle income or workforce housing. They have the authority to do that. The bonding authority at various levels of government is plenty capacity in terms of building or acquiring thousands of units of housing that we would then own, which is critical. We should own it either through nonprofits or public development authorities for thousands of units of workforce housing in this city. In fact, one of the things we put into the capital budget was literally about $60 million to go out and do what's called rapid acquisition. So we literally went and bought 3 apartment buildings brand new on Capitol Hill. Now, those were, again, targeted for folks who are homeless. But we ought to do similar things like that and finance it, because if you finance it with public funds, you can get tax breaks on that at the national level, but also then over time, as the mortgages on those properties are paid off, we would own it, and therefore we would control the rents. This has got to be explored much further than we've done so far. One thing I did to help that in the past, though, was to grab about half of the hotel motel tax in this county and dedicate it to workforce housing. And so that is being used to subsidize and to start, guess what, workforce affordable housing projects. One is over at Highline. There's a new light rail station going in the Highline area. The rail station is on the east side of 99, and on the west side is the Highline Community College. So I'm working with other representatives to acquire the parking lot at the college and the property that Sound Transit have to develop hundreds of units of affordable workforce housing, as well as low-income housing for those who really need it as well. We've got lots of opportunities. We just need a lot more allies in local governments to actually do this. It's extremely important.
Yeah, thank you both. And thanks, Logan, for the question. Dave, you're up next.
Yes, I'm a volunteer with Hall Washington, and I am wondering if there's any chance of something along the lines of universal health care passing in this session. I mean, I know the session is a short session, but a lot of us are suffering out here and we need some relief. And there is a SB 5204 is ready to go. And so I was just wondering what your thoughts are on this.
David, thanks for that question and for your advocacy on universal health care over, I think, a long period of time. that has been a bill that's been difficult to get out of committee. And I think it is the sort of this scale and pace of the change outlined in it. We did pass, that has been one of the challenges with it. It feels pretty uncertain to legislators what the, the wholesale change happening all at once in a bill like 5204. We did enact last year a permanent universal healthcare commission that requires a report back to the legislature, including on, and it empowers and directs the healthcare authority to apply for the necessary federal waivers to move us towards a universal healthcare system without the commission needing to come back to the legislature for additional authority. That is a pretty big deal. I don't know that everyone in the legislature knows that we passed it in that form, but that commission just got stood up in terms of the appointments. Is Nicole Gomez, our visitor from the 36th, still here? Because she is the chair of the 36th District Democrats, and she is one of the members of that commission. And so I think that will help move us more rapidly towards strategies that get us to a universal healthcare system than we've seen in the past, David. So while I don't, just to be totally frank, I don't see 5204 getting passed in a short session. I do think we're better positioned than we have been in many, many years to take big strides, given the Democratic administration and the likelihood that there would be more favorable judgment on waiver requests from the state of Washington.
I could add that my understanding is that Senator Emily Randall was the prime sponsor of that effort. And it's incredibly important that we try to protect her to get reelected. By the way, she's in a swing district. We don't know how her districting will turn out, but it's a swing district. We need to help her. She's been tremendous on so many issues, including this one. And so I would encourage the 43rd to think about helping out in nearby districts as we have in the past, because she deserves to get reelected. She's very effective, but is in a tough district.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I knocked on doors for Emily 4 years ago with folks in the 43rd, and we'll likely be doing that again next year. So
yeah, that's great.
Yeah, good comment there. That's she won by just a few votes, so we'll definitely need to get back out there. All right, Holly, you are up next. Holly, are you there?
Oh, yeah, hi. Hi, thank you, representatives, for being here and for all that you do and working for all these issues. I heard you bring up the issues around building and climate. As you know, we did not make any progress on that. We only have 8 more years to really make substantial progress on climate change and the climate crisis. And what I heard was that the labor has come out against all of those bills right away. And so I'm wondering, how is it that we're going to be able to address that, or either kind of work around that and get these things passed?
Well, I'll jump in if you want. I think it takes a real solid. Well, first of all, thanks, Holly, for all your work on this. You and Arvi have been very helpful with participating in what I call my climate crew, which is sort of a 43rd District Environmental Caucus. I really appreciate your support on this. I think it takes a real strategy to work with the labor unions because not all the labor unions oppose that. In fact, even the IBEW, Electrical Workers Union, was in support of that kind of thing. But we need to show how we can make this transition from some of their current construction jobs into a better future where they get guaranteed union well-paid jobs. And that takes a lot of negotiation with them and sitting down and actually working together with them. So we have to, basically try to figure out a strategy, work with them. If we just bump up against them, they will vigorously oppose it. And now there's some opportunities for compromise. I wouldn't say compromise, but mutual understanding on this issue. But we have to sit down with them and figure it out. And right now that dialogue is not happening. And that's worrisome because they have enough collective organizations to try to stop that bill. I mean, for example, the hearing on that bill had hundreds of people who were opposed to it and a much smaller number of people for it. So we got to help not only do dialogue with the labor unions that are affected, but also bring out our troops more to make the case for it. And I really believe that we will make progress on that, but we got to keep working together on those two fronts.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Who is up next? Allison, you are up next.
Hello, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to get a chance to hear from the folks who represent us here in the Fightin' 43rd. I have a question that's a little bit wonky, but it is something that really, really, I think will make sense even to people who are not concerned immediately with the day-to-day of housing and homelessness. And that has to do with the way in which our funding processes bifurcate between the capital for buildings, whether it's building them or rapid acquisition, and the operating and the services dollars. And that's everything from keeping the lights on, keeping the plumbing in good working order, to providing supportive services. So of course, Representative Macri, Representative Chop, and Senator Peterson, you well know what a critical issue housing and homelessness is for our entire region, and you're well versed in all of these issues. Can you talk a little bit about whether or not there's an opportunity in this session to try to right the imbalance and create some kind of a significant pool for operations and services of publicly subsidized housing, so that we are not constantly shortchanging the people who live in that housing and the folks who work to keep it affordable?
Yeah, that's a hard one. And I think it's related to some of the issues we talked about earlier, including and especially progressive revenue, right? So capital budget investments are not easy at the state level, but they tend not to be as challenging as operating budget challenges. We talked about behavioral health workforce. I think we know here in Seattle as well that support for people who are unhoused and building housing that has the right kinds of and diverse kinds of services for people requires a well-trained workforce. And we certainly are struggling with that here in Seattle and across King County. And so I think there will be some push around increasing state operating investments in such programs, but it remains a heavy lift. I think we are going to be in protection mode. We did pass $300 million in dedicated funding last year and on an ongoing basis to operating dollars for addressing housing and providing affordable housing and operating that housing. But we need to continue to push for solutions on that. And, I'll say I have been pretty frustrated with the state in not really acting in better coordination. I think the great example that Frank named about the 2 or 3 buildings that were acquired here in Seattle with rapid acquisition dollars, partnership between the state and the city putting up dollars to get these apartment buildings to quickly move people in. The state has not come forward with any operating help. I actually talked to the director of Low Income Housing Institute about this the other night. And we need to continue to push to make sure that the state is a partner with our local communities. As I talked with a close colleague of mine who said, you know, we in Seattle don't ask for wildfire money because we don't have wildfires, but we do have the largest homelessness crisis of any city in the state. And so the state should be responding with equal urgency. It shouldn't be just left up to local government and to philanthropy. So we'll continue to push on that. And thank you for elevating that challenge.
Yeah, I want to add that Nicole has done an outstanding job in the Appropriations Committee as the vice chair to push forward on these issues and has made quite a bit of progress already, but of course we need to do more. That's one of the reasons why we're pushing for the prescription for a home, which would be a guarantee for a home, which would also not only be the capital costs of the building, but also operation and maintenance for the building and supportive services is part of basically what is called Apple Health in our state. We cover 1.8 million people with Apple Health, free healthcare, 1.8 million people. What we're talking about is several thousand who need housing and then also need support services, whether it's mental health treatment or substance use disorder treatment, that kind of thing. And by virtue of making it a guarantee, then we can move forward and have the operating costs covered, just like you had mentioned there, Allison. And by the way, Allison, I want to thank you for all your great work over the years. You've been a great partner in all this stuff. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Allison. I want to echo that as well. We have about 6 to 8 minutes left. So I see 4 other hands up, so we'll get through those, but just ask to folks to keep it quick. So Emily.
Yeah, thanks so much. I was just really excited to hear Representative Macri talk about rent stabilization or rent caps, stopping rent gouging, however you want to talk about it. Sounds like rent control to me, and I just wonder if she could expand on that a little bit more in terms of timeline and potential, just like, you know, what kind of cap, how high is the cap, right? Are we talking about capping it at inflation? Are we talking about capping it at 10%? You know, what kind of loopholes are we talking about that we could be actively like talking to our community about guarding against, you know, so that it's not like all these brand new apartments that we're building in Seattle won't actually have that cap on them for, you know, 15 to 20 years, like we've seen the loopholes in California. And then, yeah, just like what's the plan to build a fighting movement for it? Because I want to be part of it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Emily, and thanks for all the work locally on this issue as well. So we are working with a coalition that includes the Tenants Union, the Low Income Housing Alliance, and others. We want to try to get the strongest possible policy, but we also need to just be very realistic about what's possible in a short session in an election year. And so we are building, I think, a pretty strong team in the House. So I've been working on rent stabilization policies basically since the entire time I've been in the legislature. This is the first time I've had so many lawmakers reach out to me proactively saying, like, what are we going to do about rents? They're too damn high. And so it gives me some hope that we can get some protections in place. And I think the framework around gouging is the framework that's resonating with the greatest number of legislators who I'm talking with. So the main issue is we don't need too much more organizing within Seattle, but we need more organizing around the state on this issue. So get all of your friends who don't live in the city to call their legislators about it.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Linda, you are up next.
So first of all, thank you all three for being here and for taking so much time to take us through all of these really difficult issues. More than that, thank you for the work you do on these difficult issues. My question has to do with small landlords who have 1 or 2 units and who are in a different kind of risk, but also across the city and maybe across the state are in position to provide a whole lot of housing if they feel confident that they can afford that housing, afford to provide that housing. And for most of us, keeping the rents reasonable and not doing rent gouging is to our advantage because it means we have stability. And stability is very important. But it's become increasingly dangerous to rent without any kind of backing or guarantee. So I'm wondering what you've done, if and what you're thinking in terms of asking for some kind of insurance protection, some kind of protection against the destruction that can happen when you have a renter who decides to destroy your property, which happens. Because that's the only way we can afford to continue to keep rents down.
Well, thanks, Linda, for bringing that up. I mean, one thing that we have done in the past is that when we funded either rental assistance or those kinds of things like that through voucher programs where the state would provide funding for rent assistance for somebody to rent from a landlord, that we actually created a fund in that to cover the costs when occasionally a landlord is faced with a tenant who just doesn't, I mean, they basically cause a lot of destruction. So that fund's been in place for a while, and the tenant advocates also supported because they thought it was a logical response to handling legitimate concerns about, occasionally, not that many, but there's occasionally some folks who are not responsible and then cause property damage. And the state has a fund to help pay for that. But that is only tied to that group of rent vouchers. So beyond that, I think we need to be more thoughtful and creative about how we could provide that where it makes sense, because it's important to have affordable housing, but also to take care of concerns like that.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. So that 300 million of biennium in document recording fee revenue for addressing housing stability included an ongoing contribution to the what's called the landlord mitigation fund, because we definitely do see that there are small landlords who do take on risk, and so not only is that fund available for unreasonable damages that might occur, which actually are pretty rare, but also for landlords who have tenants who leave and default on rent, so they can make a claim to the state for that as well.
Yeah, thank you both. Ronnie.
Hi, thank you, Frank, and for talking about defending the long-term care trust, and Nicole about talking about the long-term effects from this Universal Healthcare Commission or prospects. But there's other things that we should be defending, that the bills that we've passed on controlling drug costs, on controlling hospital profits, and they seem to be blocked by the fact that there's not enough staff, that we don't have an infrastructure in our healthcare authority or Department of Health or whatever. Are there ARPA funds that can be directed, even though our national legislators are dragging their feet on controlling those issues? Is there something that we can do in our state to support the bills that we've already passed in the past few years?
Thanks for that question, Ronnie. Particularly around hospital accountability and going to this point around hospital profits, we will see a number of bills this year, at least a small handful, on that looks at cost containment, particularly in hospitals. We will have, I think, a couple of bills as well on continuing on prescription drug cost containment, particularly around insulin. Those are the two biggest areas of healthcare expenditure, as I know you know very, very well, Ronnie, but for others is in prescription drugs and in hospital-based care. And one thing to the point you just made, that I and a number of legislators have been talking about is this issue around enforcement, and particularly the broad mission of the Department of Health to work on public health, which obviously has taken up a lot of their attention. They also have all the licensing, regulatory oversight for all the healthcare professionals, as well as all the facilities like hospitals. And so we're gonna try to put some more teeth in that enforcement authority for DOH, and it will continue to push on those policies. But you bring up good points that access depends on managing costs. And so we've been pretty focused on that.
Yeah, thanks, Ronnie, for that question. Nicole Gomez, you are up.
Hey everyone, thank you for letting me crash your meeting. And thanks for all the hard work you guys do. My question actually arises out of a meeting that I had earlier today, and people were wondering what remote session would look like. So I figured I'd give you guys a softball one.
Well, sort of like this, I guess.
Is it the same as last year? It was what a lot of people were asking.
Go ahead, Jamie. You have, I think, more clarity in the Senate than the House at this moment, but we can share what.
Yeah, so we're lucky because our chamber is roughly the same size, but there are only half as many of us. So there's enough room for us to be distanced in the chamber. So all of our floor sessions are going to be in person, and we'll be there in person for caucus. Committee work is all going to be remote, like last year. And I think there were some ways in which that was a great success and allowed for much broader participation. So I think we're going to lean into that and try to enjoy the ability to hear from people around the state. The piece that I think is most uncertain on our side is to what extent members of the public are going to be able to interact with us. I think the Senate administration is leaving it up to each office to determine whether to accept people coming in person, although they want to cap it at 3 people, I think, in an office at the same time. But that starts to raise all sorts of uncomfortable questions about, do we require vaccination for people to come in and visit us? And if you do, how would you verify that? And so I think it's likely that that there's people will be able to be in the legislative building, and there will be people in the galleries. But I think there's likely to be pretty limited interaction in person with legislators.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the same in the House. We will likely be a little bit more constrained. Not only are the chambers the same size and we have twice as many people, but in terms of the offices, we've been advised that there won't be in-person meetings in the offices. If you come to visit us in Olympia, the House offices are smaller than the Senate offices. So
let's do something about that.
There's all staff will be remote and all committees will be remote. There's been some talk about rotating. We had most House members, except for a small handful of leadership staff, were remote last year during floor votes. There's talk this year about kind of rotating us in, sort of similar to what they did in the Senate last year. And it's there's lots of considerations, particularly for members who have to travel far distances, about how that might work. So they're still working it out, and we hope to have a final word on the House plan in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, thank you both for that. And hearing that there's going to be remote committee hearings, just a good reminder to every 43rd member here that those are easy to dial into, and so you'll hear a lot from us about where we need folks to show up, as mentioned earlier. All right, we need to get going, but I want to squeeze in these last two, so we're going to ask again that folks keep it quick. Heidi.
Yeah, hi, thanks everybody for coming. So with the pandemic, out of the K-12 system, those who have, so students with special needs had the hardest time. and are still not recovering from their loss of education. And so kind of two questions. When is Washington State going to comply with federal law and fully fund special education and drop the cap, which is an artificial cap, and also support those students who really need remote learning, either because they still can't get a vaccine or because social emotional issues just made a remote learning a total win for them to be able to get an education in a safe environment. And thank you for all you do and for coming for tonight.
Well, I'll jump in. I think our failure to fund special education fully is one of the great missing pieces since McCleary, and it is a source of great frustration that the Supreme Court didn't push us all the way to the logical conclusion of that case. The Seattle district thinks that its shortfall is roughly $60 million a year in money that has to be covered essentially with local levies. My husband, Eric, is now in a long-term sub position working with special ed kids at Roosevelt. And wow, the resources that are required to help some of those kids adequately are stunning and obviously not covered adequately by the state. So we continue to work on that and to push. There is there's more data that we're probably going to need from districts about what they're spending money on before we can convince our budget leadership that we want to put that much more money in. As far as remote learning goes, I think that we do have some districts around the state that have essentially become specialists in remote learning. And I suspect that rather than forcing every district to create such a program, it may be best for us to have some of those programs developed by districts that do it really well and can sort of specialize in those opportunities. But so that, I guess that's what I'm thinking at this point.
Yeah, I'll just say, just from the budget perspective, that the K-12, it's the largest area of our budget, and the disruptions from the pandemic are something that we're still learning about those impacts, and I think that this will be a high priority issue. How much we'll invest, it's unclear, but K-12 is definitely on the short list of top budget issues, and particularly to respond to issues like you just mentioned about the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on special education students.
Yeah, I just want to clarify it for one thing, is that for everybody, is that when Seattle Public Schools has to fund special ed out of the levy, it means kids get missing out on other programs. We don't have a 7th period day, which is really needed for a 24 credit graduation. We don't have arts and sciences like other districts. We don't have programs like other districts. We don't have nurses. Well, we need to fix that as well, which is also on our ask. The state funds only 9 nurses for over 80 schools. So that formula is broken. So I just want to let other people know that I know there's a lot of other priorities, but education has not been fixed. And we really need to focus on that and maybe even have it on the list of our 43rd priorities, and not as an afterthought. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. And please do follow up with Camille about that. Yeah, Camille, if you could reach out, that would be great. Okay, and then Paul, I'm gonna ask you to be very quick.
Yeah, just super quick. The remote access to y'all, I would encourage you to think past the pandemic and keep the remote access that you have, that we did. It's been awesome to be able to listen in to legislative sessions and provide feedback and everything like that. And I would hate after the pandemic is over, whenever that might be, that we would lose that. So make it permanent.
I can't speak for the House, but in the Senate, we were doing a lot of remote committee work before the pandemic. And I think now that we've been through this experience, I don't see that ever going away.
Yeah, the pandemic helped push the House. I think we definitely were slower to come to that. We had put out a plan to do more remote testimony, but had to jump in, with both feet with the pandemic. And I think all members who I've heard from agree that we need to be able to keep a pathway for a remote testimony. It's really enhanced. I mean, and particularly, well, in the committees like public safety and law and justice and appropriations, when we're actually able to get live testimony from people who are currently incarcerated about the impacts of DOC policy. I mean, this would just never, ever be possible in-person testimony. So that's just one of many, many examples of the value of it. So thanks for those comments, Paul. I think we all agree with you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, very much for that comment. I totally agree as well.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, for that question. And thank you to all of you for joining us and answering folks' questions tonight. Really appreciate it. I know you will be hearing from all of us frequently over the next few months as we enter into session. So looking forward to those discussions. And yeah, just want to give another thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having
Awesome.
us.
Yeah, thanks. And so I hope other folks will stick around briefly. We have a few other things to get to. I'm just removing these spotlights from folks so that you all see me again. So yeah, next thing on our agenda is electing a vice chair. As many of you know, Maddie Vonhoff, who had been our vice chair, had to step down because she is in grad school and her schedule just didn't allow for her to be as involved as she wanted to be. I actually have another announcement to make today, which is that my wife is 37 weeks pregnant right now. We are expecting an addition to our family, basically any time now. And with that, I am also not going to have the capacity to lead this organization and to give you all, the time and the effort that doing this takes. So this will be the last meeting that I am serving as chair of the 43rd District Democrats for. I will remain in the chair position until next January, when we'll have a open election for a new chair. I will still be involved. I'm still a PCO. I'll still be a member. I'll still be attending these meetings when I have the time. I'm just not going to have the time behind the scenes to do all of the work that goes into making this org run. So we are going to elect a vice chair tonight. And then we will have a chair election in January that will likely be run by that vice chair. Maybe I'll be able to join. We'll see. I certainly hope to be there. So it has been a wonderful time serving on the board for the past 5 years. Have really loved getting to know all of you in the 43rd. Back then I joined right after Trump was elected. Obviously, there was a federal trifecta for Republicans. We did not control the state Senate here in Washington State. So it's been really great knocking on doors for Manka Dhingra, Emily Randall, all of our Seattle candidates. In 2019, we had a lot of success. So it's just been a true joy. I want to thank Maddie for serving as vice chair, and Tara Gallagher, who is my vice chair my first 2 years as being chair, Scott Forbes and James Zappa, who helped teach me how to be a chair. And then Nicole Gomez is here, and Shasti Conrad, and I think Julianne Kemp and Benton in the 11th, and Stephen Reed in the 37th. Other chairs who've really helped me out and supported each other, in doing this work and keeping these orgs going. So, and also want to thank all of our representatives who are here, Jamie, Frank, Nicole. Really appreciate your support of the 43rd. Before I was on the board, when I'm on the board, and I know going forward. Just really appreciate all of your support and guidance and the conversations, even on things we disagree about. So I just really appreciate it. So with that, you will all see, there will be an email announcement about that sent out later that we'll be having chair elections. So please do look out for that. And I will also say, I think there are going to be a couple of other board positions potentially coming open. So if you are interested in joining the board, please do reach out to me. I'm still around, chair@43democrats.org, or reach out to other board members. There are opportunities to get involved. And we'll, I feel very confident that the org will be in good hands going forward. But do just want to encourage you all, if you've been attending meetings or are interested in joining the board, please do reach out. So with that, we're going to move to an election of a vice chair. And so the vice chair is going to be busy the next 2 months when I'm really out helping take care of our new arrival, and then we'll serve to help the whoever the new chair is as well going forward in running the organization. So with that, I will open the floor for nominations. So you can nominate yourself, you can nominate someone else. And if we get multiple nominations, we'll go to speeches and a vote. And if there's only one person, we'll probably do that unanimously. So I will open the floor for nominations. And please raise your hand if you have one to make. I see Efren has his hand up already.
Yeah, I'd like to nominate Tara Gallagher.
All right, Tara Gallagher has been nominated. There is no second required for this. Thank you, Efren. Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? All right, hearing none, we will close nominations for vice chair. And Tara, I think a lot of folks know you, but do you want to introduce yourself really quick?
Hi, yes, I'm Tara Gallagher. I've been a member for about 16 years now. I was, as Scott mentioned, I was vice chair last term and actually vice chair the term before that. And I was happy to step down this year to let someone new in it, but with having to have a new chair, I decided to run again for vice chair. My main thing is institutional memory and just a lot of logistical knowledge and knowledge of party operations and rules and all the boring stuff that can help keep things running. So I'm happy to run again and help get a new chair settled in and keep the organization going.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tara. Really appreciate all of the different roles that Tara has filled for us in the past many years. Okay, so seeing as there's only one nominee, if there's no objection, we will elect Tara Gallagher by acclamation. Any objections? I'm not expecting any. All right, I'm seeing lots of applause, so I will call it. Tara, thanks and congrats on CIFT Vice Chair again. Really appreciate you giving it a third round go around as Vice Chair. I'm not sure how many times you've done this, but really appreciate you filling this role for us. Okay, and yeah, just to reiterate, please you'll see some emails about the potential board positions that will be open. Chair will definitely be one of those, but I think there might be a couple others. And Tara will likely be stepping down as King County representative, so that will be one that's open there as well. So please do reach out when you see that email if you're interested in involved. We would love to talk with you. So with that, we will go to our committee reports. I don't think we have too many. The one that's on the agenda is our PCO appointments. So Cody, do you want to walk us through those real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Relatively simple. I think we have two appointments.
Natalie and Chad have applied to be PCO. Natalie in 1863, precinct 1863, and Chad in 1858. So I'm not positive if they are on the call. If they are on the call, then I'd love for them to be able to give a quick introduction. It doesn't have to be anything super scary, but just a quick just a quick kind of what brought you to the organization and what you're hoping to do in the PCO role. So I think maybe we'll give several seconds to see if they're here and if they can unmute or ask to be unmuted. Otherwise, we can proceed. So I'll stop talking.
Yeah, I do not see them here, and it's very possible that they were here earlier and we are running over. So wouldn't be surprised if they had to drop. So I think we can go ahead with approving them.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, great. So are there any objections to appointing Natalie and Chad as 43rd PCOs? Any objections? Any objections? All right, seeing none, they have been approved by the 43rd for appointment, and we'll get the form sent off to King County and get that all squared away. A good reminder, if folks are interested in becoming PCOs, please message Cody. You can do that in Zoom. He's a co-host, and we'd love to get you set up with that. So other committee or rep reports from our board members. Amy.
Sorry, I was unmuting myself while you were sending the request, so I ended up muting myself again. So hi, everybody. Many of us were up really late last night watching the Redistricting Commission try to do their final votes on our redistricting maps, the maps that are going to be in place for the next decade. And the commission was unable to settle on final maps from the deadline. If you were watching along, it was a little confusing because it seemed like they were voting on it, and then just some things fell after the deadline, and it was very clear that there had been quite a bit of delay, especially from the Republican commissioners. They had failed to negotiate in good faith in the days and weeks leading up to the midnight deadline last night. They weren't willing to negotiate on actual map proposals until the very last minute, which made things very difficult. And it appeared that they wanted to use the deadline to force the Democratic commissioners to accept partisan gerrymanders that would have likely been illegal and made it impossible for our candidates to win in swing districts next year. So, what comes next? And I'm going to read some of what Tina Podlodowski had to say about this. There's a lot that we still don't know. The court could try to act quickly to enact something along the lines of whatever the last drafts of the commissioners' maps were, or they could start from a blank slate. We just don't know what that process is. Tina Podlodowski has already asked the Washington Democratic Party's lawyers to get to work on questions about next steps and how best to advocate for better, fairer maps through the court's process. But do bear in mind that all of the testimony you provided, all of the commentary you provided, that is going to it's going to make a difference here. I believe it's going to make a difference. I believe the court is going to listen to that, and they're going to listen to the commissioners' responses to that data. I should say the Democratic commissioners. So follow along with the Washington Democrats. As we learn what comes next, we'll be letting you know. Just keep an eye on your inbox for your 43rd Dems newsletters. We'll keep you all up to date. Our hope is that the court's action will reflect the fundamental mission of the Redistricting Commission and law, which is drawing and passing compact, contiguous districts that reflect real communities of interest on the ground. And following the Voting Rights Act, the Latinx and Indigenous voters can be heard in the Yakima area, for example, and respecting and reflecting the public testimony that was given by folks like you. So thanks everybody thank you if you spoke up during this process, and keep an eye on your inbox. We'll let you know how else you can help. That's all from me. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, thanks so much, Amy, for giving that update. And yeah, I mean, there's an alternate universe where we're discussing the maps tonight that we got, but instead we're going to be waiting to hear what the Supreme Court says. And there will be impacts on that, right? The 43rd is going to shrink no matter what. So some of us will be moved to new legislative districts. We will give you all updates and keep you informed on what redistricting means for our organization as we get the new maps. So yeah, really appreciate everyone who commented and Amy for keeping track of all that for us. Are there any other committee reports that folks want to give? I think that was all that I had heard about, but just wanted to give the last chance. All right. Yep. So we have all been very busy through this election. Really good to talk about the upcoming session. Yeah, we'll all be back at it. A reminder to everybody that we don't have a meeting in December. So our next meeting will be, our next general meeting will be on January 18th, which is in a couple months. So want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving next week, a wonderful holiday season. Keep an eye out for info from us. You will get emails and there will be action requests and things coming on. It's post-election is not a time for us to all just go away and completely ignore what's going on, but please do take some time to recuperate after what was a really intense and busy election season. So with that, is there any good of the order or announcements that folks want to share? Kelsey.
I also just want to acknowledge that it's Native American Heritage Month. So I want to also name that and hope that people can, I don't know, celebrate that and also just honor it.
Yeah, thanks for that call out and reminder, Kelsey. Appreciate it. Nicole. Oh, I just muted you, Nicole. Sorry about that.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to let you all or remind you all that the Institute for a Democratic Future is they're currently accepting applications right now. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a 6-month fellowship program that runs from January to June, and the participants get to meet with elected officials, experts, business owners, lobbyists, nonprofit leaders that make a difference in the communities all over the state and also in DC. So if you're between the ages of 21 and 39 and are interested in public service, feel free to apply. And looks like the deadline is actually on, early applications are due November 14th and late would be November 21st. And I'll put the link in the chat.
That would be great. Thanks so much, Nicole. Paul.
Yes, since this will be Scott's, I guess, last meeting, I just wanted to, good of the whatever, say a deep thank you to you for the leadership you've given over the last few years. It's been really great getting involved here with the sort of leadership and guidance and shall we say calm approach that you have brought particularly to these meetings under pandemic. So a big thank you to you, and congratulations on the baby and all the best, and please stay involved. So that was it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paul. I really appreciate the kind words and from other folks who have sent me some DMs. It's been a really fun time. So even during those really long endorsements meetings, I really appreciate the group we have here. It's been great. So, and I'm not moving. I'm not going anywhere else. Like, you'll still see me around, but just not in this role. So I'm looking forward to working with you all going forward. And in particular, I'll just say, I know that in our organization, we have a lot of young people and we have a lot of older folks who maybe don't have kids at home. And so I'm looking forward to maybe exploring, how our Democratic orgs can become a little more welcoming to folks who have young kids at home. So I know Nicole Gomez is, doing that as well. Yeah, we have work to do there, and maybe that'll be part of my next focus. So Camille, you are up next.
Yeah, thank you so much, Scott, for everything. Honestly, it has been such an amazing chair. Also want to call out that the final day for public comment for the budget committee hearings is Thursday. Over almost 300 people turned out this last Wednesday, most of whom were advocating for the solidarity budget amendments. And so I would just encourage everyone to sign up for the last budget hearing public comment to advocate for the solidarity budget.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that reminder, Camille. And then Emily.
Yeah, just wanted to make the case. I know I made a general appeal for canvassing earlier, and I'm usually at the time, but wanted to make the case that this Sunday, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. at the Thomas Street Mini Park, we're having a Bleep the Recall block party. We're gonna have donuts. We're gonna have live music and artists who are donating their, whatever they raise from selling their art to the recall to the solidarity campaign. But most importantly, it's a place to bring your ballot and cast your ballot with your neighbors, and also a potluck. So just like a real community event right in the heart of Capitol Hill, Thomas Street Mini Park. It's linked in the document I shared earlier, if folks still have that, from 1 to 4 p.m. on Sunday. So we're hoping that the weather holds out, which is not a given with the December election, but I will send the event to Scott and he
Yeah, if
can
you could
maybe
send that to me,
send
I
it
will
more
put that.
broadly.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
put that in the chat. That'd be great. Give me just a second, everyone. I'll share that. All right, that's linked there. And someone asked earlier if we could send out the links after the meeting. And so we will try and do that and consolidate everything for you all there. But yeah, that sounds like a great time. So thanks for sharing that, Emily. And Holly.
Yeah, hi. Oh, I don't have my video on. Hi, everybody. Yes, I just wanted to also encourage people to go to the budget hearings and ask for more funding to deal with the climate crisis. I guess for me, that's everything else is going to get worse if we don't deal with this climate crisis, and we are so far behind. And it appears that the city council is not making that a big priority. They are putting money into it, but it's just not enough. And they don't even know in the budget how much they're going to affect the climate, reduce greenhouse gases through this budget. So if you're feeling the way I am, please show up at the budget hearings or write about needing more money for climate. Fighting climate. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Holly. We don't have any more time to waste on this. So yeah, really do need folks to show up for that. Okay, any other good of the order that folks have? Okay. With that, I think we are adjourned. So thanks so much, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. And yeah, there's still more work to do. Budgets, recall, opposition, lots to keep going. So really appreciate your efforts there. So I will see you all sometime in the near future, hopefully in January or before. So thanks and have a good night.